Ben Wright, who's with us tonight, emceeing an event at Seven Oaks Country Club in Beaver. We will be launching our in-person breakfast schedule for 2023 on Wednesday at 8:30 a.m. in Beaver County, PA. If you are in the Pittsburgh region on Wednesday, we would love to have you. These are open to the public. As you can see here, we have some kids who join us. We have people of all ages, and we go around the room with the microphone and have veterans share stories. And it is always a fascinating experience. So we'll be doing that about 25 or 30 times this year. And we'll be letting you know about our upcoming programs there. But I want to turn to our guest tonight. This is a special group of people. The North Carolina Veterans Writing Alliance Foundation was founded informally, it seems, as a group at the Asheville, North Carolina VA. To the non-veterans who brought it together, Dr. Bruce Kelly, primary care physician at the VA, and creative writing professor Joseph Bathanti, who's with us tonight. And I think their role would be facilitator, coaching Vietnam veterans who did not know each other when they would come together, coaching them to meet every week and begin to generate stories and do some writing and poetry and prose. And tonight we have with us John T. Hoffman, who is a helicopter pilot in Vietnam, Carl Zipper, who also was a helicopter pilot in Vietnam, Ed Norris, I hope, will be joining us. He was a Marine in Vietnam. And we have Robert West, who served in the 25th Infantry Division at Cu Chi in Vietnam. Dr. Kelly, let me start with you here. I'm going to ask you to unmute. And Joseph, you could chime in as you see fit. Let me ask you, can you tell us just a little bit about how this Writers Alliance came together at the VA?
Well, I did not serve in the military. And so when I started at the VA in 2011 as a primary care physician, I knew very little about military culture and really only about Vietnam, what I'd seen, in film and in the news. As I got to know the veterans in my care, I was really struck by just how many of the Vietnam veterans were still carrying the war with them, 50 years down the road. As we had a chance to get to know each other a little bit better, I came to understand, the impact that the war had on them. Most had been through the programs that the VA had to offer. And despite the best efforts of our mental health folks, a lot of men were still really carrying burdens that impacted their lives. And as they were reaching the, maybe last 10 or 20 years of their life, really, having a need to reconcile what they'd carried for so very long. Just sort of coincidentally, I happened to hear about Joseph Bathanti, who is North Carolina Poet Laureate, had traveled the state doing writing workshops for veterans. And I called Joseph, and over a period of time, we crafted this idea to start a creative writing program for the veterans in my care. There were really no models for what we wanted to do. Gratefully, the leadership of my VA trusted me enough to be willing to give us a shot at this. There were a lot of concerns. We were very clear that this was not going to be therapy, that this was creative writing, and that we were going to give these veterans an opportunity to tell their stories in a safe, non-judgmental way among a group of peers. Fortunately, we had support from the North Carolina Arts Council, the North Carolina Humanities Council, as well as some folks in our community, so that Joseph was able for 6 months to be named writer in residence at our VA. And that's when we really began this work in earnest.
Dr. Kelly, you're a medical doctor, you're a physician. What in the world does creative writing have anything to do with your profession, your job at the VA?
Well, I've always been very interested in the medical humanities. I think that, in the midst of, all of the medical issues that we face, and deal with and care for, there's always a person at the center of the story. And I've just always been interested in, what was kind of behind the scenes, getting to know who these men really were. And everyone has stories. There's a wonderful quote by the poet Muriel Rukeyser: "The universe is not made up of atoms, it's made up of stories." And so with Joseph's, guidance and experience, we really saw this as an opportunity to give these men a chance to finally become heroes of their own stories. Everyone here knows how they were treated when they returned home. I think we recognize that, the nation really had a moral obligation to these men's healing. And fortunately, we found enough support. And over time, we had to start very carefully, sort of under the radar at the VA. But over time, and you'll hear from some of the men who were part of the early sessions, it was their work, their stories, and their advocacy that allowed us to move the program to finally become a formal program at our VA. But stories matter, and I think we found that that's really been true in ways that neither Joseph or I ever expected.
The hero's journey is a template for human development that a lot of people are familiar with. The mythology expert Joseph Campbell wrote a lot about it. And the final stage of the hero's journey is sharing the story, telling your story. And I think that's where we kind of fail as a culture, is we don't have that space where people can share their stories, their hero's journey. Joseph Bathanti, before we get to our vets, how did you know that there was I mean, Dr. Kelly said you didn't sell this as a therapeutic model, and yet you had to have sensed in your work with veterans that there was some kind of therapy going on here.
Yeah, what happened in Bruce eloquently synopsized what happened, and there were so many moving parts, but there were so many mystical things that occurred too that occurred as well that we just couldn't foresee going into it. So what happened, I got into this work in a lot of ways by accident. I was appointed the Poet Laureate of North Carolina and was asked to declare a signature project, something apart from going to schools and libraries and hospitals. And I said that I wanted to work with returning combat veterans, all veterans, and their families, to harvest their stories through poetry, fiction, playwriting, you name it. Now, I didn't know what I was getting into at all, but what I did know is that stories, that everyone, as Bruce said, has stories, not just writers. Writers are maybe a little more neurotic, so they think their stories matter more, but I don't think anyone's stories matter more than others. So I said I was going to do this, so then I was faced with doing it. So I went into all these little nooks and crannies, these little counties all over North Carolina. And of course, North Carolina is a state that's absolutely rich with veterans and veterans' families as well. And so I was being taught as much as I was teaching. I would say this too, that I was very much interested in Vietnam veterans more than others, simply because, if you will, that was my war. I came of age during that war. I was a kid watching it on TV at probably around age 12, 11, who knows, in Pittsburgh. I'm from Pittsburgh. I grew up in East Liberty.
Yay!
And I figured the war in my 11-year-old brain would be over by the time I was old enough to have to go. So I was in the very last Vietnam draft lottery, and only by the grace of God was I spared. It wasn't because I was better. It wasn't because I was smarter. It all sort of winded down, and the draft was discontinued. But I've always felt a deep debt to Vietnam veterans and in veterans, period, because those who go to war so others could stay home. And that's exactly what happened. A number of us stayed home. So this was a way of returning. I wouldn't call it guilt per se, but I knew that there were stories out there that needed to be harvested. It just turns out serendipitously, although Bruce and I we believe in, I think, a very deep spiritual connection that occurred during this work with veterans. Bruce and I, just by happenstance, connected. He had been pioneering medical humanities in Asheville and at the Asheville VA for years, and I had been working on this for a few years too. So his call was just, a real epiphany. The other thing that's worth mentioning, and it's really important, is that Bruce and I became really, really, really good friends almost instantly. And that was a real key to becoming really, really good friends with the men. As you know, I think in the first group, all Bruce's patients, most of whom did not know one another, never laid eyes on them. The common denominator was that they were Vietnam veterans, combat veterans, and it's testimony to the kind of physician Bruce was, because when he strong-armed them and said, here's a new prescription, you guys, it's going to be poetry, and I want you to show up in classroom B every Wednesday. They did that as much as anything as a favor to Dr. Kelly, but we were certain, we didn't know what was going to happen, These are guys who insist that they're not writers, but as we like to say, boy, can they write. So we didn't know what was going to happen after that first session. Would they return? Would they put their heads down? They wrote. They returned the next Wednesday, and the next Wednesday, and the next Wednesday. And before we knew it, there was a real tsunami of extraordinary writing coming out of that group. But more than that, the camaraderie and love that we saw develop among them, those men, was the most gratifying thing, because suddenly, and I'm paraphrasing here and perhaps poorly, they said they had soldier buddies again, because the kind of love and camaraderie that they had experienced in Vietnam, even though Vietnam had in many ways destroyed them, also imbued them with this extraordinary patriotism, the love for the country, but especially the love for their fellow soldiers. So we saw that rekindled again and again in classroom B, what we came to call the church of class, the church of classroom B, because I've been a creative writing teacher for 46 years, and I have never seen the kind of miraculous development occur among students that occurred in that particular class. Just amazing.
The North Carolina Veterans Writing Alliance Foundation has published this book, Brothers Like These, Vietnam War Veterans, and we have the contributors to it tonight. And also then a follow-up, Brothers and Sisters Like These, an anthology of writing by veterans. There's another component to what you've done. You somehow managed to get an Academy Award-winning director to create a beautiful 9-minute video that kind of tells the story of Brothers Like These. And I thought we'd screen it, if you don't mind, now,
we love that,
in advance of our conversation with the veterans we have tonight. So here is Brothers Like These. Ooh, I've got to make sure it's optimized for, hold on. I got to optimize it there, optimized for video. Here we go.
You cook cornbread or something, you open the oven, and all that, when you bend down to get it out, and all that heat, wham, hits you right in the face. That's what I thought of when I stepped out them doors of that plane. What a journey for me across the sea, to have known the things that I had to see.
This was so different across the sea, especially for a country boy like me. I grew up in Burnsville, North Carolina. We raised all our food. We had milk cows. We raised hogs. I can't.
Remember going to town.
Hey, I'm sorry. I'm getting conflicting messages here from Zoom. Was that sharing?
We're not seeing it. I'm not seeing it. Are y'all seeing it out there in the audience? We're getting the audio, Todd.
Okay,
But
it was not.
We're not getting the images.
All right, hold on a second. Hold on just a second. Let me start that again. I'm sorry about that.
That's
I think I
okay.
went to full screen to try to get a better image. Here we go. Okay. There's like these. Here we go. All right, this is better.
You know, when you cook cornbread or something, you open the oven and all that, when you bend down to get it out and all that heat, wham, hit you right in the face. That's what I thought of when I stepped out them doors of that plane. What a journey for me to cross the sea, to have known the things that I had to see. This was so different across the sea, especially for a country boy like me. I grew up in Burnsville, North Carolina. We raised all our food. We had milk cows. We raised hogs. I can't really remember going to town when I was growing up. I was 20 when I got drafted. I'd never been on a plane, never been close to one. I was scared to death.
My uncle was a master sergeant in the 101st Airborne, so I felt it was like my duty to serve my country.
I'm from the Midwest, which is an ag state. Had a lot of farm kids. They were tough kids, but, nothing like this.
I went to Vietnam in January of '68. I remember going back into Saigon after the Tet Offensive, and there was dead bodies from one end of the bridge to the other. I just kind of thought, holy shit, it's got to go uphill from here.
I was a sniper. If you're shooting, you're the guy that's pulling the trigger, so it's going to haunt you for the rest of your life.
I can remember laying down on my back with my rifle laying on my chest, saying, if my mother could see me now.
You depended on each other. That's all we had then. The worst thing is seeing your brother get blown away. You're talking to him, look back, and then they're gone. I've seen it many a time. Many a time.
It's still tough for me.
When I found out I was going home, my first reaction was, I'm tickled to death. I'll get out of this hellhole. We was called names, spit on, warmongers and baby killers. Just like you had committed murder or something, hey, we need to lock you up. It hurt. I was injured, I think we all was, but I learned sometimes the worst injuries is the ones that you can't see. I didn't go out nowhere for years. I didn't even go to the grocery store. Sort of like a turtle, I guess, when it's crawling along and it gets scared or something, it draws up into its shell. And if I'm inside my shell, nobody ain't gonna bother me and I ain't gonna get hurt.
I wasn't whole again. For years, I thought I was crazy. I was like a bomb. I would explode on you. I went to the VA hospital and I said to them, you need to do something because I'm going to kill my wife, my kids, and myself.
They didn't have enough information or data to realize that what had happened in Vietnam to people coming back was something different than World War II or World War I.
When somebody's committing suicide 40, 50 years after they're in Vietnam, there's some underlying problems there.
Nobody could give me a name or a remedy to solve this problem. That's where the writing group came in.
I joined a class, I walked in, there were maybe 20 guys in there and didn't know any of them.
I thought, this is maybe some other BS or whatever.
I thought it was crazy. How could writing something down help your head? I never was into poetry, but when we first started reading our stories, we thought, hey, you felt the same way that I do.
Other fellows' stories would jog your memory of something. Oh, I remember that. Yeah, I was there then. We were all feeding off of each other.
People in that room that I was sharing feelings with, I hadn't shared for a long, long time, knew what I was really talking about. There's no limit here as to what you can say, and just let it come out.
I came back the next week and the next week, and I felt free enough to try to express myself.
Something just like turned inside, I guess.
It can be hard to put war into words. Some local vets find it therapeutic.
Emotional stories of war told on stage in Henderson County, a presentation known as Brothers Like These.
We all marched out on the stage and sat down.
I was nervous, the lights go down out in the audience, so you can't really see anybody other than the first 3 or 4 rows. First of all, I better put on my glasses.
My paper was doing like this, shaking.
Could you read it for us?
Okay. What a journey for me to cross the sea, to have known the things that I had to see. First was a man they called a VC. He was trying to kill me. This was so different across the sea, especially for a country boy like me. Then I thought, I'll forget it all. I'll not talk of all I've been through, so it will go away. The memories and dreams, they stayed, and I started feeling I'm the only one this way. I think of what would my life be if I'd never had to cross the sea. But if I had not, then I would never have met brothers like these. And when I raised my eyes up when I got through, it just done something.
Looked over there and there's one lady, she's crying. Just tears coming down her face.
I'd never dreamed of nothing like that.
It was like a weight coming off me.
It felt like the room just filled up with, I guess, love.
It's always said our secrets make us sick. That's the story of Vietnam.
Being in this group has really let me know that I'm not the only one going through these things.
I think of what would my life be if I'd never had to cross the sea. But if I had not, then I would never have met
brothers like these.
This writing program, it was a real healing for all of us.
How wonderful. Oh boy. Gives me chills. Robert West, you were one of the skeptics. I love that quotation. You thought, this is going to be another bunch of BS. But it wasn't. Did you think that Robert, that you had a story to tell?
Well, I dealt with the VA when I came back in '69, and what they wanted to treat me for was not what I had. So I had to do my own research and figure out what was going on in my head. And so I stayed away from VA for a long, long time. And then I started going back, and Dr. Kelly ended up being my primary care doctor. And maybe after my physical or something, he said, we're going to start this writing group, and you ought to come down and join us. I'm like, it's going to be some, it's some psychological other bullshit that he said, no, you just come down and, express how you feel and say what you think. And I went, okay, I might show up. So I actually went. And the first meeting was really quite powerful. And Joe asked us, our first writing assignment was to write about where we're from and who we are. And it was quite meaningful what the other guys were saying and how they came across for people who were call themselves non-writers. It was quite moving for me, and I thought, okay. And then we began to meet, pretty regularly, and everybody started to really find out that they had stories to tell, and those stories were all able to relate to other stories and other feelings in their room and experiences. And so it was like a real catharsis without any real psychological intent, but the outcome was very profound, psychologically beneficial. And it was quite the experience. And
Robert,
Dr. Yes, sir.
I'm just going to say, I'm looking at Jim Roberts here, who's a Vietnam veteran. He was a MAT team, mobile advisory team advisor in 1971 in Vietnam. He had a remarkable experience of spending 1 year writing a memoir. And he said that, and I'm speaking for him because I don't want to unmute him. I'm saying it much better than he would say it. Just kidding. He said that over that 1 year, he remembered just the process of writing, like dredged up memories that he didn't even know he had. Did that?
Oh, happen? Yeah. You'd hear one story, and then, something would go off in your head and you go, damn, how remarkable is that? Because I have something very similar. And it was like all those thoughts and ideas and feelings were like bouncing around off of each other. It was like, and I think somebody's feelings and words inspired me to sort of dig deeper into how I felt. And I just think it was just powerful in the sense that it spurned really meaningful feelings that had been hidden for years to come to the forefront. You could cry, it didn't matter. It was all, we all knew what, number 10 GI, number 1 GI, crazy. There was no crazy in Vietnam. It was just Vietnam. It was like, there's no fear. There's no glory. You just there. It's just like you live one day, great. You got one more day to go. And that's how it was. And that's how all those guys were. It was really meaningful for me. And I'm sure for a lot of the other guys in that group.
Can you tell us just a little bit about your service? You served in the 25th Infantry Division.
Yeah, I was there in Tet of '68, and they moved us back into Saigon. And it was just, I'd only been there 12 days. I thought, holy mackerel, man, this is just way, because there's nothing in the world ever will prepare you for that type of experience. Nothing. nothing you could ever begin to imagine. And you come home and people say, how was it? How was it? How do I describe that? Well, what can I tell you that you could relate to the shit that I went through? There's nothing out there. So when I say, they say, how was it? I said, well, it was pretty bad. And they go, oh, it was bad. But they have the depth of badness cannot be, unless you were there, you cannot understand what bad really was, and pain and sorrow and heat and hunger and diarrhea and just every day. That was your life every day, and you think, well, I'm thankful that I'm going through all that because I'm still here. So that's just how it was. That was Vietnam. There was no craziness in Vietnam. It was just Vietnam.
Robert, when you were describing it, I was scrolling through here, our Zoom room, and we have a lot of Vietnam vets with us. And I just see so many of them with a little smile and a little nod as you were talking. Carl Zipper, how are you?
Well, I'm doing great. I'm happy to be here. I love to listen to other people's stories. I've tried to tell mine, and like Robert said, if someone hasn't been there, they really don't understand what you're talking about. So it's really good to get together with other vets that say, yeah, I know that, and they'll tell you what happened to them. And that was what helped me, I think, more than anything. I did enjoy saying where I'm from, writing that, and the other things that we did. And I'd never written a poem in my life, so I struggled with all that. But I did conquer it a little bit. I'm just not good at it. But listening to the other guys in the room read their stuff was therapy for me. It certainly was.
You were a helicopter pilot in Vietnam, correct?
Right. I flew with the 176 Assault Helicopter Company. We were based out of Chu Lai, the Marical Division. And I got there in July of 1970. And we went to the New Guy Center, is what we called it. It was probably another name for it, but we
probably obscene.
Probably several names for it, actually. But we had to spend 2 weeks in indoctrination, and I think just acclimation for a lot of guys to the weather there. But I was from near Savannah, Georgia, and so the weather there in Vietnam was just about the same as at home. And I was used to being on the beach and stuff like that, so I enjoyed that aspect of it. But at that 2 weeks in that New Guy Center was very interesting. They taught us about sappers in the wire, and they fired off some quarter-pound, charges of TNT to scare the hell out of us. And we had a rocket attack while I was there at the New Guy Center, and nothing hit really close to us, but you could hear the rockets going off. And some guy, we had these windows that were screened, and they had a drop down cover for the window, and they were all propped up, and so you could get air circulation. And some guy, he was injured during that rocket attack because he jumped through the window, jumped through the screen to get out of the building. So I mean, just crazy things happen like that. And I was there. I wasn't there very long before we had a guy killed. And then we had gunship shot down. We don't know. Well, we don't know whether it was friendly artillery or what, because they called an end to the artillery, but it might have been a late round or two. But it could have been somebody that got him. But I still remember going to a memorial service and seeing the boots and the helmets, the flight helmets, up at the front of that chapel, and listening to all that. I have never forgotten that. And I couldn't walk into another church for most of my life because of that. And I can't to this day stand to hear taps played. It just, it works on me. I'm better than I was. But yeah, I lost I made a friend there. I made three really good friends, and two of them left in December. And of course, I was still there, but I had met this other guy. He was ahead of me. He made an aircraft commander before I did, and I flew with him, and he mentored me quite a bit. He was an excellent pilot. I mean, excellent. And the thing that I liked the best about him was, no matter what went wrong or what happened, he was always cool and calm. He never got upset, and he didn't like to hear people talk poorly about other people. And he'd say, well, you don't know what it's like to be in his shoes, you know, and he'd give you reasons why that person might have been such an asshole at that time, you know. He just had a lot of sympathy for everybody. And we spent a lot of time by ourselves talking, and we dug out a bunker that was full of sand, you know, so we could have that bunker. And we sat around and talked about what we were going to do when we got back, you know, what we were going to do together. And one day he was showing me something, something he'd gotten from his wife. It was either a box of something, or I don't know, but anyhow, he had this letter, and he read me part of the letter. And I looked over there, and he had a stack of letters that you wouldn't believe from his wife. And so we counted those letters, and he had more letters from his wife than he had days in country. So I consider him to be a lucky guy. My wife basically quit writing me, and I'd get one every now and then. But then we didn't know it, but our battalion, our group, I guess I should say, 16th Combat Aviation Group, 14th Battalion. Yeah, they everybody sneaked out real quietly and went up to Quang Tri. It was like January of 1971, and they left our company behind. We were the only unit out there working to resupply or carry people around in the Maricao Division area. And then what we found out was we've been left in reserve in case they needed things, you know, needed more helicopters, more people up in Quang Tri. They invaded Laos with South Vietnamese Army and American and South Vietnamese pilots. And the Air Force kind of had an idea about what was going on there because they were used to it, but the Army didn't listen to them. And they had 37 and 57 millimeter anti-aircraft positions that were protected by 3 51 cal positions, and they had these all along in the areas where they think people would want to go. And the Air Force would bomb them and bomb out an equal, you know, a cleared area that we could go to. But when we got to an LZ, I would say when they got to an LZ, I didn't have to go. The North Vietnamese would hug the perimeter of that LZ, and when you went into land, you know, there'd be 100 AK-47s firing at you, and flying along, you get hit by 51 cal or 37 millimeter, you know, anywhere up to 5,000 feet with 51 cal, but you know, way over that with 37 Mike. And I got shot on New Year's Eve. And so I was still there. I was recuperating. I guess at the time they had Lamson 719. I was assigned as assistant operations officer because I had a medical profile. I couldn't sit down but just a few hours at a time. And I had trouble with my left leg working the pedal. But we figured out that if everybody and all our pilots went one time up to Quang Tri as relief, that nobody would have to go twice. Well, when we got down to it was the guys came back from the first time, and you wouldn't believe the stories they were telling. The Vietnamese Army people were rushing our helicopters. You know, too many people would get on the aircraft. People would be hanging on the aircraft when they were taking off. I mean, it was just unbelievable. These guys were being routed out, you know, by the NVA. it was bad news. And so they tried to resupply some of these units, and they ended up having to drop stuff by parachute because they couldn't go in there and land. They would not try to rescue anybody who was shot down because the enemy was they'd leave them there and use them as bait to shoot more helicopters down. So that's what we heard. And so then they asked us to go back up there again. And there was one guy we had who he had 54 days left in country. He said he wasn't going. He was too short. But he was the only one, you know, that hadn't taken a turn or hadn't volunteered to take a turn. It was supposed to be voluntary, and basically it was. So the platoon leader was kind of in a bad position there where this guy was refusing to go, but everybody needed to go one time. And this friend of mine, Reg Cleve, super guy, best friend I've ever had. I loved him like a brother. He said, he told the platoon, he talked to this guy, and Reg only had 43 days left. This guy had 54 days left. And so he talked to this guy, and after he talked to him, he realized that this guy was not going to be, he would be a hindrance there rather than helpful, because he was in such a bad mindset. He was scared to death to go up there. So Reg said, he went to the platoon leader, he says, okay, I'm going to go in his place. So he ended up going twice, and he got up there, and it wasn't very long before, well, it was March the 22nd. And he'd been up there about 3 days. March the 22nd, the word came down that his aircraft had been shot down. And they described it as a classic, like a World War II movie where you see the aircraft is shot, you know, hit, there's a big puff of flames and smoke, and then he goes down trailing smoke and boom, hits the ground and goes on fire again. So the ones that saw it and the ones and the gunships that flew over it later said nobody could survive it. But I've seen people crash helicopters and unbelievable, just torn completely apart, and nobody basically would get hurt. So, you know, there was all that doubt. But so March the 22nd, the four guys there, the crew chief had been my crew chief. He was flying what was my helicopter, and it was a good one. He had one of our best co-pilots who was fixing to make aircraft commander. And then he had a gunner who'd been there. He'd already been there a year, and he was fixing to re-up for another 6 months. So he had a really high quality team, and he had everything he needed in that helicopter to survive. Plus he had a what we call a grease gun. I think it's an M3, shot 45 caliber rounds. He had that. They had C4, you know, they had all kind of survival gear, but they never got the chance to survive, apparently. And the MIA changed to KIA, and of course, all the way down the line now, that was bodies not recovered with these four guys. And this thing went on and on and on, where we didn't know what happened to him. I got back to the States, you know, I was looking into aviation books at who was killed and what they were, you know, what they were classified as, seeing my friends that I went through flight school with dying. But this one thing hurt me more than anything in my life ever hurt me. And just a few years ago, the family of his wife, she had gone on and remarried, but she had a fatal disease. I don't remember what it was, but she never forgot about Reg, even then she remarried and gone on. And her family, she had about 8 or 9 brothers and sisters, and they loved him. They really did love him. And so 47 years, they wanted to get in there before she died. 47 years after that happened, they had the Army do a memorial service for him at Jefferson Barracks in Missouri. It was the full-blown thing, you know, taps, 21 gun salute, 2 helicopters flew over. It was a really a big deal. It was all in the newspapers. what was going on. And then they had that was on a Thursday. Then in Friday, we spent the whole day, I guess, at the VFW. And the guys that were there that knew Reg, or the guys were there at the VFW, they treated us like family. Right. And we got to meet a lot of his family, Reg's family. And then on Saturday, they had another memorial service at the courthouse. And his brothers got to speak, and some of us guys got to speak. And then they had a news helicopter that they had gotten a hold of, and he flew over the place because so it was another helicopter flyover.
Carl, what was Reg's last name?
Cleve, Cleve.
Very good. Wow.
Yeah.
I'm gonna, sometimes it's like an event like that kind of stands for other traumatic events in an experience. So Reg, was the focus. I want to turn to Ed Norris. I see that he's joined us before going to John Hoffman. Ed Norris, I think you're the Marine of the bunch, correct?
As far as I know, yes.
As far as you know, you were Marine Corps 1965 to 1968. You were wounded in Vietnam.
Yes.
I don't know if you heard Robert West say here that when he first started getting into this writing, group, he thought, I don't know if this is for me. I don't know if if this is this really going to help? Were you skeptical when you started writing your story?
Very much so. The thing of it is that my writing skills were not, as far as I was considered, not very well at all. And then plus going into this room and seeing, I didn't, like other ones that I've said, I didn't know anyone there. So I just got there and was like, okay, well, I'll do this one time and that's it. I'm not going to do it anymore. And got there and started hearing the different guys talk and everything else. And I said, well, I'll come back next week and see how that goes, and then the next thing it's 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, and it just kind of snowballed the whole thing. And I became very good friends with all the guys that were there, some of us still communicate with each other, and which is very good. Because after I came back from Vietnam, I didn't talk to anyone about Vietnam for over 15 years. No one even knew I'd been to Vietnam. But the thing of it is that the stuff that I went through, going through all that, I've been called crazy because of my behavior and stuff. And it wasn't until I went to the VA in Dayton, Ohio, that I got into a group of Vietnam vets and found out, that, we talked about what was going on, and that was it. It was like, okay, but I still was not identified as PTSD. It was just VA at that particular time, as far as I was concerned, they drugged all the guys, came back because of if they got upset or whatever else, they go in and give them a shot, and I mean, I've been tied down, put in straight jackets, put in a room, locked up, and I've been to quite a few VA hospitals. I mean, from West Virginia all the way to Texas and back up to Asheville. And Asheville has been about the best one I've ever been in, except for the one in San Antonio. They would come in second to Asheville. But it's because of the doctors that were there. And Dr. Kelly came across as somebody who really cared about how I felt and what I was going through. And I really appreciate that. And that was the main reason I went to the meeting the first time, because of him. And I had that kind of respect for him that I would do that, and come to find out it was good for me, to be among other vets and hear their experiences and know that I wasn't alone. And that's, to feel like you're on an island and you don't want to feel a certain way, and then go into a room and realize that, hey, there are other guys that feel the same way I do. Maybe I'm not crazy. If I am crazy, there's other guys that's just as crazy as I am, you know? So that was the basis of it, you know, and my experience in Vietnam was getting there, and I didn't go over as a group. I went over and joined the group over there, and I flew in on helicopters. I was stationed on a ship, and we flew in and got other people out of trouble. And come to find out,
Is this you, Ed?
I'm not really sure. I think it is on the level.
Because this during your interview, they showed
The one on the right is my first cousin. Yeah, and that's me on the right.
okay.
And the taller one is my first cousin. And we met in Vietnam, and same last name and everything. And his dad and my dad were brothers.
Okay.
Yeah, so fortunately, I was in a different squad than he was in, because I outranked him. And I was glad that we weren't in the same tune, because otherwise he always thought he was better than me anyway. So, so I didn't want to have to be ordering him around.
So what was your job in Vietnam? You said you would get other people out of trouble?
Well, I was squad leader for infantry, and we would fly in on choppers, you know, and get between the group that was in being pinned down, and we got land between them, and then so they could be relieved, and we would take over from that point. And so when I got injured was when it's up around Conde Inn, and that's near the DMZ. And I went out on a patrol. Well, first of all, my squad that I had, all of them been killed or injured, and they had to be sent out. So the lieutenant had to make up who from other squads to give me a squad, because it was my turn to go out and recon the area. Well, I went out and I didn't go very far, and the radio went out. And so I told the lieutenant, I said, I got a real bad feeling about this. You know, I said, I really don't feel comfortable about this, you know. And he said, well, it's your turn. You got to go out. So we went back out, and we got to my first checkpoint. So I got my men down, and so I walked a few steps away from them and took out my binoculars and trying to look around and see what was going on. And then just as I was dropping the binoculars back in the case, I saw out of the corner of my eye something flying by me, and it was a grenade. And so I ended up had to, even though it did knock me out, I still had to give orders to my men to how to carry me, because they tried to carry me over the rifles. Because my leg was broke, they couldn't do that. So I said, each one of you grab a limb and let's get the hell out of here, because by this time I'd already called in for artillery to walk in on us.
Right.
And they were getting pretty close. So we had to get to an LZ so that I could be taken back to the ship. So that's my experience and everything. And, you know, one other thing I want to say before I don't want to take up too much time, but the thing of it is that because of this writing group that I was in, now I'm very free about talking about Vietnam and how it affected me. Where before I just go, yeah, you know, that was it, you know, nothing, didn't talk about it at all. And now, because of the writing group, somebody asked me about it. I have no problem with talking to them about it and trying to get them, encourage them, if their father, the brother, or whoever else was in Vietnam, to, you know, just start writing stuff down, whether you know you read it to anybody else or not, just write down what you were feeling. And that's one thing that I really got from the group, that it gave me the opportunity to feel free to talk about where I've been and what went on with me.
And it strikes me that it takes a lot of courage to kind of turn your attention deeply into that traumatic experience and then trust that you're going to be able to find the words to represent what really can never be represented in words, can never be explained to somebody like me who didn't even serve in the military, let alone in war in Vietnam. But it takes courage to do that. And I admire the courage that we're hearing from you and Carl and Robert so far about, you're being willing to do that and to come on tonight and share a little bit of your story. John Hoffman, you're another helicopter pilot.
Yep. I went over in 1971, came back in December of 72. Vietnam service for me has been problematic for decades. I mean, when I came back from Vietnam, I was there, particularly in 72, when Nixon said we weren't there, and showed up at Fort Bragg in January or February 73, after getting out of the hospital at Walter Reed and getting off medical leave, post-combat leave, by the way, to be told nobody knew where I was, and I've been AWOL for the last 6 months. And it took the deputy chief of personnel for the United States Army, a gentleman named Jack Hennessy, classmate of my father's from West Point, to fix that at Fort Bragg. That's how, excuse my French, screwed up everything was during that period of time. Rest of my career, that was a problem. Every time I got promoted, and I retired as a colonel, every time I got promoted, I had to submit documents to prove where I was during that period of time.
That you weren't AWOL.
And then everybody would say, well, we'll get this fixed. Then nobody did. It's like the big lie. But anyway, move the clock ahead. And I ended up at Walter Reed having a good part of my right lung taken out. And when you're in your mid-60s and they do that, it's a little bit debilitating. Life was different from that point on.
Right.
So the Army said, well, you got to get with the VA. The VA in your hometown where you're living now, they're the ones that they're going to help you out. They're closer than we are at Walter Reed, and they'll take care of you. Well, of course, the VA said, wait a minute, you weren't ever in Vietnam. So they had to get that fixed. Had to get it fixed by going directly to the general who was at that time head of the VA, who had been in Vietnam same time. I wrote him a letter, said, look, this is unacceptable. But anyway, I got that fixed. And I show up in Dr. Kelly's office. And I was already pissed.
Yes, he was already pissed.
You could attest to that, Bruce.
On top of all the insults over all that time, now I got to deal with the health effects of Agent Orange, losing most of my right lung and dealing with all of the things that even continued to happen after that, as Dr. Kelly well knows. And Dr. Kelly looked at me and said, you got effed when you got sent to Vietnam. You got effed when you came home. You've been effed ever since. And then you got effed when you got here. Is that close enough, Dr. Kelly?
Good enough.
And
sounds like you learned how to speak military lingo, Dr. Kelly. That's good. That's good.
Very quickly.
So I guess he recognized in me that, I had issues. No surprise to my wife, of course. So that's how I ended up in the group. And the thing I liked about it, and just to amplify what, Robert and Carl and Ed have said, that comradeship, that closeness, that communication, that sharing is all about helping you, address and bring out things. And in my case, it led to me writing a book.
Yeah.
I'd wanted to write everything down for my family because, part of my family didn't understand. My dad did. I mean, I've been in Vietnam for 15 days, and my dad showed up, and then we were in Vietnam together.
There you are with your father.
There I am standing with my dad at his BOQ at Tan Son Nhut. Yeah, wow, there's a flashback. He understood. He and I communicated in a way that none of my other 6 siblings could because of that shared experience. But, the rest of the family still didn't understand. A lot of my friends, friends from college, close friends that I had didn't really understand. And I knew I needed to write this down. And then there were people that were in the units with me at that time. I went over there initially as a Chinook driver. I was a Chinook pilot. And unlike a lot of other people, 3 days after I arrived in Vietnam, I was flying missions. I mean, things were really tight at that period in 71. That unit ultimately got stood down. I ended up as a slick driver in an assault helicopter company, the 48th Blue Stars, out of Marble Mountain outside Da Nang, till it stood down. And then I ended up as the last infantry platoon leader in an air cavalry troop in Vietnam, because I had a ranger tab and I was a captain infantry branch. And instead of being sent home like I was supposed to be, they said, no, you're staying, you're going to command this infantry platoon in the air cav troop. Well, that meant I was doing flying and everything else in it, but that's kind of the history of how that all occurred. And I ended up not being able to leave until December of 71 after a mission that the book's really about. But I wanted to write down what we had been through so that the guys who've been telling their families about it, and yet the history said we weren't there. The media to this day still says nobody was in combat during that time. Total nonsense. The Army Green Book, the official history of the United States Army, says the units I was in Vietnam all left at 71. I mean, to this day. So I wanted to write it down. This group actually helped me, Dr. Bathanti and Dr. Kelly, the two of them, the guidance, talking to everybody else, was instrumental in just getting my brain to organize all this and put it down in writing into a coherent book. And fortunately, I found a publisher who thought it was a good story and agreed to publish it. So that you can buy it on Amazon or, Walmart or wherever you want to buy your books. It's out there, which to me is amazing that people would even be that interested. But I've heard from a lot of people, particularly guys in the units that I was in, who want to do it. But I cannot tell you how much I appreciate Dr. Kelly and Joe Bathanti and the things that they did. My wife would echo that, I'm sure. She's in the other room, probably nodding her head vigorously right now. But this kind of event is a real catharsis for a lot of people, because it gives you that ability to start organizing some of this in your brain in a way that you hadn't up to that point. That shared experience, that shared communication, and it gives you direction. Hey, it's time to sit down and write all this down.
Right.
And I very much appreciate Joe's help in reviewing the book and editing it and whatnot for me. How do you get that kind of help? There's only something like this that brought all that together, enabled me to do that.
And I do want to put a link to that book in the chat. And before we go further, I do want to take we do a little station break. I just want to let people know this is a Veterans Breakfast Club happy hour. We meet every Monday night at 7 p.m. Eastern. We'll be here again a week from tonight. Rock and War, Billy Terrell, Vietnam veteran, on the VBC happy hour. He will be our special guest on Monday night. He was a doo-wop singer and had a musical career. Then he got drafted and he ends up going to Vietnam and has quite a story to tell about his service in Vietnam, of course, coming home. That's very reminiscent of what we're hearing tonight. And also he talks a lot about the work he did in South Vietnam in an orphanage, and at the time when he was serving and then going back. So that's Billy Terrell. He'll be with us. He's from Asbury Park, New Jersey. He'll be with us next week on VBC Happy Hour. We also have a special event coming up on Wednesday evening, Wednesday, April 12th. This is what you call a hybrid event. We're having it in person, and it's also going to be streamed. This is Buzz Bissinger. He's on the left. You may not recognize his name, but you know his work. He wrote Friday Night Lights, which was made into a major motion picture and a TV series. His new book is called The Mosquito Bowl, a game of life and death in World War II. His father was a Marine in World War II. The Mosquito Bowl was a football game that was played on Christmas Eve, 1944, on Guadalcanal, between two teams of Marines. And they happened to be some of the best college football players in the country who played this game. Many of them would later be killed in the Battle of Okinawa. This book, The Mosquito Bowl, is an examination of the people who played that game and the context in which it was played. He is going to be giving a talk at the Heinz History Center here in Pittsburgh. The Veterans Breakfast Club is behind it. And then it'll be streamed online. You do have to register for this. So I'll be sharing the link to this event here in the chat. And then finally, or almost finally, you all know, part of what we do is we publish a magazine, a quarterly magazine, VBC magazine. We send it out to 15,000, 10,000, I'm sorry, 8,000 households plus 7,000 hand distributed, free of charge. Anybody who wants it. We take the stories we hear on our programs and we write them up. It's published quarterly, and the new issue will soon be out. It is at the printer. It'll be headed to mailboxes soon. And this is the official release of the cover. Are you ready? I don't think you're ready. Okay, here I go. There it is. It's the story. Harry Van Riper, our own Harry Van Riper, who lost his left arm in Vietnam, 25th Infantry Division, 1968, is the cover story. A fascinating story about his recovery, and also about the bionic arm that he is slated to receive. So this is our VBC magazine. It will be out hitting mailboxes soon. If you want a copy, let us know. We could send out 1. We could send out 50. This is how people find out about Veterans Breakfast Club programs. And finally, we do have a survey after every program. We want to see, what we did right, what we did wrong, how we can improve. 2.5 minutes. We will put the link in the chat. Please do take it if you have the time. We'd love to get your input. We use the response to the surveys to tweak our programming and improve it. I want to invite anybody who has a comment or a question to raise their hand like this, or raise their Zoom hand, or put something in the chat. Thank you, Sean, for putting the Survey Monkey survey in the link in the chat here. Bill Confer, another helicopter pilot. Bill, I'm going to unmute you because you asked a question I don't understand. I know it has meaning, but you know me, I don't know nothing. Bill, how are you?
Hey, I'm fine, thanks. Thanks, Todd. Hey, I asked if John was a mule skinner. He had talked about being a Chinook pilot, and we had at Coochie, we had a lot of Chinooks there, and they were called the mule skinners.
No, the unit I was in originally was A228 First Cav, and it became the 203rd Assault Support Helicopter Company up at Marble Mountain. We were flying A model Chinooks.
Okay, all up north, huh?
Yep.
Yeah, we were down just near Saigon at Coochie, so. But all those
experienced
stories
Coochie much later.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, when we moved to Saigon, to Benoit, actually Lassiter Field on Benoit in F Troop 8th Cavalry, the Blue Ghost. We flew out into that region over Coochie. When I last saw Coochie, it belonged to the bad guys.
Yeah, yeah. You might have got the chance or the opportunity to see them go into Nui Badin, where it's a 3,000-foot mountain up there near Tay Ninh, and we weren't allowed to shoot at it or go near it hardly. We had the top of it. We owned the top, but that's all we owned. They were all over inside that mountain. So yeah, it was pretty interesting. Quite a place. And Todd, I enjoy all the stories tonight. They're pretty amazing.
They are pretty amazing.
Similar experiences with some of the helicopters. When Carl was talking, I think it was about aircraft getting a lot of bullet holes or whatever. We had a lot of aircraft that were directing artillery that actually got hit by the VT rounds that came too close to them, and they get their tail booms pretty well peppered with holes, and still flying and made it in. We didn't lose any that way, but that was a nasty business when you were using VT.
And when Carl was talking, I thought of you, Bill, and your story about some of the remarkable experiences you had in surviving in a helicopter. Yep.
Yeah. I had a mid-air collision with one of the Cobras at 1,200 feet, and 7 people in my aircraft survived. And if I ever get a chance to write it, I think the book will be called A Miracle, because it just doesn't happen. You saw what happened at Fort Campbell this past week. Why 2 aircraft came together and everybody died, and it's a real shame. But 7 people in my aircraft made it through that one, and we lost a lot of aircraft. We lost tail and tail rotor, parts of our tail rotor, our main rotor, and the Cobra that hit us, they actually lost their main rotor at 1,200 feet. So there was no hope for them at all. Those 2 guys died in the accident.
Boy, we have a lot of wonderful comments here. I want to ask, first of all, Joe Griffey's, Ocean City, New Jersey, wonderful Welcome Home radio show host. Joe, I just you always have something to say.
Fabulous show. There's thousands of books written about Vietnam. Way too many are written by people that were never in Vietnam. So they write what they hear, what they watch on television, what they read in the paper. And I disagree with some of the people earlier that writing is therapeutic. The difference when a Vietnam veteran writes his story, he's not writing just from his mind on a computer or a piece of paper. The subject first develops in his heart, then it goes to his mind. And I got to tell you something, the stories are so great. I use all the time. I was very lucky in life. They told me I was smart enough to go to college, so they're going to send me to Vietnam. But once a Vietnam veteran starts writing a story, the hardest thing he has to do is knowing when to stop.
Yes.
Because material, the information keeps flowing, and no Vietnam veteran out there should ever be told that he's not a great writer, because the stories are there. They're true. Sometimes they're so true, they're hard to believe, but like your guest had on tonight, Todd, they're all true. It's even hard sometimes when you were there to tell the truth when you're writing, because I think sometimes you want to tone it down a little so people can understand it better.
Yep.
But I think history someday will say the greatest history books written in our country were written by Vietnam veterans.
Thank you, Joe Griffey's. Bob Mizwa, you had a question for Ed Norris?
Ed, were you with the 1st to the 11th or 1st to the 61st up there on Northern I Corps on Nui Con Tien?
You're going to have to unmute, Ed.
Right.
There we go.
Okay. No, I was with 1-3.
Okay.
Like I said, we were stationed on the ship.
Oh, yes, you were on the ship. That's right.
Oh, so you did fly you in then?
We had guys like John and Zip flying us in.
Yeah, because I used to do combined arms operations at Nui Con Tien, and I'd either have the 1st at 11 behind me or 1st at 61st. That being the 1st at 11th, they were straight leg infantry. I can't remember how they got them in behind us. The 1st to 61st were in APCs, and they'd follow right behind our tanks because they knew if we ran over a mine, we wouldn't get flipped over like they did. And it just that we had some good operations there. They're good guys. I know on one mission, 1st to the 11th, one guy got killed by the North Vietnamese, and I remember getting together with my platoon sergeant and my tank commanders, and I said, from now on, when we go north, those main guns are going, those 50 cals are going, and those 7.62s are going, and they're going to be pointed directly north. LT, they told us we're not allowed to fire north. I don't give a damn. What are they going to do? Send me to Vietnam? Huh? you know that, because I remember one time I called in a sit rep and LT, are you guys shooting north? No, we're shooting west. You did what you had to do to keep your guys alive. And that was a bottom line. The goddamn politicians, pardon my English, really put the hurt on us. That's all I'm going to say.
Fred Tittle from California, you may have the most important comment here. just because I think it gets us into how do you even begin? You know, if you're a veteran and you want to start writing your story, Fred, you're interested in starting to write?
Thanks, Todd. Well, twofold. I have written a lot and I'm editing some of my writing, but I found that in one of the things I was editing about 3 weeks ago in reference to a death of one of my comrades in Vietnam, a friend of mine who I served with called me, didn't know anything about the thing I was editing, but he brought up the death and finding body parts of the person that I identified. So he and I and a couple of other guys that served together have been in communications about doing some writing, some joint writing together to deal primarily with grief, because we were with Marine Unit, Hotel Company, 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines. We never had a memorial service. We lost a person. We lost a lot of people, but we didn't have time to do memorial services. So I want to be able to write with this group of Marines that I serve with, but also to make it possible for other veterans to be able to write and to unpack all of the stuff that they've been dealing with for years. I'm a clinical chaplain now. So I was able to do my writing when I was in seminary on a medical hold while I was still in the Marine Corps. But I have so many brothers who have not had a chance to unpack all of this stuff. My whole seminary career was writing about Vietnam.
Isn't that great? So you're looking to kind of assist then other veterans who want to write.
I want to be able to complete my stuff, but I also want to include those individuals that I know have not been as fortunate as I am to be able to unpack that carnage of having seen so much while we served there.
Carol Wagoner, you put a wonderful suggestion here in the chat. There's something called the California Writers Group.
Yeah, I took that. I saw that.
Yeah. California Writers Group's been around since 1909. People like Jack London established it in Berkeley. And there's now 22 branches, which are all over the state. Like the bigger cities, of course, have them. We're on the Central Coast and we're in a little town in Pomo. And there's 50 people in our club, 100 in the bigger clubs, but they all have monthly meetings and you're welcome to join. You're welcome to come free, or you can become a member for like $42 a year.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah, there's a lot of good writers.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm close to Berkeley, about 45 minutes. So
sure.
Yeah.
That's the original branch up there.
All right. Thanks.
Okay, great.
Ken Kazak, I don't want the evening to end without you chiming in at least with a comment or a question. Ken, you are a writer yourself and you're a writing coach. What does this all sound like to you here?
Todd, thanks for a few minutes, but I'll make 3 comments here. First, regarding Ed. Once you train your brain to think the way a writer must, you get all these ancillary benefits. And one of those benefits is the ability to convey through the spoken word. I think Ed was just so articulate when he told his stories, probably because he now has a trained brain to think the way a writer does. Number 2, I saw in the chat that Sue Watson put a comment about prompts, and it's ironic. I'm actually editing a book for an individual who was a high school dropout, became an HVAC mechanic and had a wonderful life. And he has this prompt where you get a question a week. And by answering the question, you end up writing a book. So 485 pages, we're in the last 25 pages. And lastly, let me just say this to the people in my city, probably other cities. I know there's people, Ken, you know what? Someday I'm going to write that book. I'm going to write that book. And Todd, as you well know, I'm a fan of John Fogerty, and one of John Fogerty's greatest lines is someday never comes. So if you're on this call, get a hold of me. let's start the process. I'm easy to work with.
Yeah, you are easy to work with. And yeah. I mean, you're never going to be younger than you are today. You know, yeah, absolutely. Annette Grunseth, I see you smiling. How about you? You're a writer.
Well, yes, I guess I've been involved with writers in Wisconsin and part of Right on Door County, which is up in the peninsula of Door County. But I have to say, you stick with it. It took me 20 years to get Combat and Campus.
Yeah.
To get this out. It took me 20 years of, should I do it? Should I not do it? It's my brother's letters.
Yeah.
And I guess I really related to, I think it was Robert West when you said Vietnam, the hell, you can't know what it is. My brother wrote that, and a lot of people didn't share that in letters. Nothing was censored. And so we were in shock. And it's something that the story had to be told. And it took me a long time because it was a hard reading and hard to live with it for so many years.
But what a labor of love you did on behalf of your brother.
And it helped me kind of reconcile after he had passed away. It's kind of like having some time with him.
Yes.
I just wish he was here to know how much this has helped other veterans and the veterans from his unit that found the book. And I only wish he'd had a group like Dr. Kelly and Joe Bathanti's group, because I think it would have helped him a lot.
Robert West?
Well, what I found ironic was that in that room, we all came from different backgrounds, different socioeconomic levels, different IQ levels. But what I was so taken back by was that some of the people that were writing, and someone mentioned truly from the heart, and I told Dr. Kelly this, that some of these people were like Shakespeare in overalls. It was so prophetic that it was, I couldn't believe, just based on their demeanor, that the words were flowing in such a meaningful way and had such an impact on everybody in that room. It was quite amazing.
Just amazing. Scott Masters, Canada's greatest history teacher. How are you tonight?
I'm doing well, thank you. And I love that you always introduce me like that. I'm not sure if my students agree, but it's nice to hear. I had a question, and this is kind of similar to what was said a moment ago, and I was thinking about an interview I did with a Vietnam vet for the VBC earlier this year. And Sean knows the guy because he edited it, but his name was Terry Young, and he was a Chinese-American veteran who was, subjected to intense racism from his fellow soldiers. And it was just a really, really difficult story to hear. And while I was listening to him recount it, I found myself wondering, is his sharing this story making him feel better? Is it dredging things up? Is it making him feel worse? And I was wondering for the different people in the room who have shared tonight, if that was something that you went through, maybe sort of unleashing those demons before you were able to reconcile with them.
What a great question, Scott. I will ask Robert, Carl, Ed, and John, if you want to chime in. Robert.
Well, that's a very good point, because you've harbored all those feelings for so long, and then all of a sudden you let those out.
Yeah.
And you've defended them with all your mind, body, and soul, because you didn't want to think about them or relive them. So it's like, I'm glad I did it, but damn, should I just have held on to that? But after a couple of days, you begin to realize how cathartic that release really was. And it is very cathartic. That was a very good question.
That's a wonderful question. I remember interviewing a Iwo Jima Marine who had hand-to-hand combat at Iwo Jima, Jack Watson, and it was the first time he ever shared his story, and it was very painful. I could see the pain on his face as we were talking, and he said the next 6 weeks were really, really tough, that he had dredged all this stuff, all these demons up, and they spooked him. He said, but then like the healing started. You have to go through the pain in order to heal. That's how he kind of explained it to me. Ed, Carl, I don't know. Do you have
my experience as far as being prejudiced, in a sense, I got it from the United States. But when I got to Vietnam, it didn't make any difference what color you were. You watched out for each other, and I can remember being in a foxhole with another guy, and he was white. I said, it's a shame, and this was in 1967. And I said, we're here watching each other's back right now. I said, when we get back to States, we're going to be fighting against each other, and I said, it shouldn't be that way.
Wow. Boy, oh boy, Ed.
What got me in the writing groups was the intimacies of the stories that were told. I mean, these were deep, dark, personal events that were affecting people in a negative way. And I had seen this with talking to other vets, but to see these guys say the things that they did, and I'm going like, okay, like other people said, I'm not the only one that feels this way, and it was very therapeutic hearing the stories told.
Bruce Decker. John. Yeah, John, and then Bruce. John.
Penetrating down into some of the stories about loss over there. My best friend was killed. It was something that took me probably a month over there just to get over the fact that Dusty almost had gotten killed. I mean, I couldn't deal with it. It was almost too much. And going back to deal with that, talk about that, and then write about it, in the book was a hard thing to do, but it was a good thing for me to do that. It helped me deal with it finally, in a way that a lot of people, don't get that chance to do that. But I also have to say that losing my father to Agent Orange in 2010, he had 3 tours to Vietnam, and it was his 3rd war. Having him die from Agent Orange from the exact same cancer I got was, it was mind blowing. It was mind breaking. It was, relationship damaging, if you will, almost with my brothers and sisters and the rest of the family. We worked through it, but it was incredibly hard to deal with that. And then, a year later, I'm in Walter Reed, having part of my lung taken out. So this, discussing all that and going through that, talking to the other guys in the class, as much on the side as the writing that we did was very useful for me. It was very helpful.
Bruce Decker, you posed an interesting question to me, I think privately here in the chat, about the differences between World War II veterans' writings and Vietnam veterans' writings.
Yeah, I've been involved with the Veterans History Program with the Library of Congress, and I've interviewed veterans all the way from 1941 to more recent. And particularly regarding World War II versus Vietnam, when the World War II guys came back, they were welcomed. They had parades in New York and every damn thing you can imagine. They were heroes, and they were welcomed as heroes. They went through the same shit that the rest of you did, but they got welcomed home. When the Vietnam, and many of my friends and classmates were in Vietnam, I didn't make it. I was in the Air Force. They didn't send me. But when you guys came home, basically you got crapped on. And that means you didn't have a chance to release it. There was no heroes. And unfortunately, the people that crapped on you have been in charge of our government for most of the time since then. It's just remarkable interviewing people, old vets from Korea and World War II and veterans from your era. It's a remarkable difference. That's it.
Okay. An observation. I see it's 8:35 or 5 minutes over time. But I wonder if Joseph Bathanti or Bruce Kelly have any kind of parting words for us here.
Yeah, I do. First of all, I want to thank you all for coming. Again, I'm from Pittsburgh, so it's nice to see so many fellow Pittsburghers in their little boxes there. Yeah, I mean, what I wanted to say, it's not terribly profound, but just from a writing standpoint, when we come to writing, whatever it is we want to write about is a disordered mess in our heads. It has no organization whatsoever, and nothing seems more disorganized than writing about war once it's in your head. But there's a kind of order that you obtain by writing down what happened. It has an order on a page that it never has in your head. And so we also preached a lot about rewriting too. There is no writing, only rewriting. And the other thing I wanted to say, and the guys have said it more eloquently than I could say it, is they did as much teaching in that class as Bruce and I, because what they did is they gave permission to one another to tell their stories again and again. This happened to me. Haha, I'm not the only one. Bruce and I talk a whole lot about, that the best healing comes in community. And somebody here, I can't remember who it was, mentioned that he wanted to write with those people. There's something about being in the room with other vets who've experienced that kind of trauma. There's a kind of togetherness and comfort, I believe, having them literally in the physical space when they are putting those thoughts down. Maybe a little bit like what it is like when you're in combat and you have these dear people who love you and would lay down their lives for you. So it's a little ineffable. I'm stumbling a little bit, but I think being in a room with other like-minded people and giving permission creates that safe space where you take a chance on saying things that you've only said to yourself again and again. And once it's out, there's something powerfully freeing in that. And again, thank you all for coming tonight. And thank you, Todd, for having us.
How terrific. Robert West.
Well, I'm just telling Joe, it's good to see him. And what Dr. Kelly and Joe created at the VA was more beneficial than you can put words to. So, and I've told them both that several times.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Kelly, Professor Bathanti, Robert West, Carl Zipperer, Ed Norris, John Hoffman, everybody else at the North Carolina Veterans Writing Alliance Foundation, brothers and sisters like these. Thank you so much for a wonderful program. The rest of you, I hope you all enjoy a good week. It is Easter week coming up, and I hope to see you next week. We have two big events. Maybe see you next Monday night. Take care, everybody. Have a good evening. Thank you again for sharing your time with us.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Good night.
Night.